Welcome back to I Now Pronounce You Divorce. This week, we're going to be talking to somebody I've had the privilege of meeting before about probably one of the biggest assets that people trade in divorce. You know, I know when people are going through divorce, emotions run high, and we think about like who's going to get the children. Do I get to stay in my bed? Things like that. But when we slow down, we start thinking about the impacts of our future, and really cut through the noise. The house is generally one of the biggest assets that we have in divorce. And especially as we've seen the value of houses rise and rise and rise, it may be the biggest thing. So Dante, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we can go from there.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's Dante Royster. I'm the owner of Epic Mortgage. I'm a licensed loan officer, and we like to consider us a regional mortgage broker. So we're licensed in multiple states, and we help people obviously in unique times and when really change in people's lives. And obviously, divorce would be one of them.
It really is. And, I think that when we start talking about change, it nobody likes change, and especially change when it comes at the cost of a lot of stability. A lot of people, they latch on to that house as their stability. Have you seen cases where people try to keep the house, but it just you're looking at it, you're like, you realize this is going to destroy your finances because you can see all their finances.
No, definitely. Yeah, I feel like there's such a psychological warfare going on because, winning a divorce, there's a feeling I feel like sometimes people want to win. And so the house is the victory that they try to, align themselves with. But, one thing you have to do is you do need to work with a mortgage professional, and really sit down and say, can I afford it? Because obviously one thing that is happening that we all know is that we're separating the income, and so now affordability definitely becomes a concern.
It does, and it's no longer. I mean, we have rising interest rates. We have. I mean, when you're looking to refinance the house, it's not always. Well, it was $1,500 a month. I have $1,500 a month. Just let me pay you the 1,500 and keep the house.
Exactly.
So, you brought up something good, win. We as attorneys have to deal with the idea of winning the divorce all the time. And we go to great pains to try to simplify the process and identify what win means to our clients. But how do you help someone in the mortgage space really redefine what a win looks like?
Everything comes down to affordability, and just like you mentioned, I'm checking. Hey, what's the new mortgage rates, right? Just for people that have bought homes maybe during the pandemic. So now that's 6 years ago. They may have a 2, 3, 4% interest rate. Well, that doesn't exist right now. So just that adjustment frame from an interest rate. We also have to look at property taxes. Property taxes have increased pretty much throughout the whole country, as well as homeowners insurance. So we have to kind of factor those ideas in, and then also income. Where were you in the relationship? Were you the primary breadwinner, or were you taking care of the kids at home? So those are factors that we have to kind of evaluate and see what's the best idea, and see how we can utilize the equity to maybe help people out to maybe pay someone off via refinance, maybe not have to sell the home.
Yes, and you brought up a lot of great points of what people should look at. And one of the pieces of advice I know I give our team when they're talking to new clients, contact a mortgage officer early and often when you're going through this process, because it does you no good to sit back and day one say, hey, I'm going to fight for the house. You then deploy attorneys at however much we cost to fight with the other attorneys at however much they cost over something that you may not even can afford. So before fighting for the house, what are questions someone should really be asking themselves?
Yeah, and I just mentioned most loan officers, there is no upfront costs. So, the conversation is free, and that is 100% something they should consider. But, some of the questions would be, can I feel comfortable in the next 12 months paying this mortgage by myself? That's very important. So let's project what the actual mortgage payment could potentially be and what I feel comfortable. The next thing is, if I maintain this house, is that because you're emotionally want this house, or is it strategic? Does it fit along and align with your budget and with your future? What are your future plans? it may be to relocate after, you really think about it. We have to look at it from a income perspective, strategy versus an emotional strategy, those attachments to the house. And then, if I keep this house, what will I sacrifice? Because you might have to give up something to keep this house, and that's something you have to factor in as well. The sacrifice of losing something, because now, it's not two incomes, it's one income. So now what do you have to sacrifice to maintain this? Is it worth
And sacrifice is not something that anybody's good at.
it? No.
You brought up earlier taxes, and that's one of the things I think are most often overlooked when we're working with clients. They never think about taxes, and I've had clients that own their home, and I'm like, you don't own it. You only own it as long as the state doesn't take it because you forgot to pay your taxes. Like anybody can take your house whenever you want. So, you know, besides taxes and my dislike of taxes, what are when someone's going through a divorce, what are you looking at behind the scenes that maybe not everybody knows about?
We're looking at basically we have formulas like debt to income ratio. So we're evaluating all your consumer debt that shows up on the credit report. We're also factoring the new potential mortgage payment. We're also factoring, a 2 year work history. We have to take into account, okay, if you were stay at home mom, let's just say, and now you just started a job, we have to go back in time and see, do we have a 2 year work history? Because we want to have some form of job stability before we're just going to give out, two, three, $400,000, on a mortgage. We also have to factor as well as just, dependents. So, we look at, we take a mortgage application, and all those things that I reference are showing up on the application. How many dependents do you have? Is there residual income? And so we have to kind of factor all those things in. It's not just blanket. Sometimes people are like, well, I have good credit. It's a little bit more than that.
It is. And, one of the questions we always get is like, well, I'm going to get spousal support in 2 months, so I can buy the house now. Is that true?
No, no, and really depends on the state that you're in. Every state does fluctuate the law, but we do have to have a sense of seasoning period. Like certain states will say, hey, we have to at least see 1 month. Some states are requiring 12 months that you would have to have seasoning for at least 12 months before we can actually use that income. So it does matter, and it makes a difference.
It does. And, that is probably one when you talk about like the non-primary breadwinner, right? Somebody that now is going out to the workforce, getting that news like, hey, yeah, I know you've had a job for a week. It looks like a good job, but I need a little bit more time under your belt. There's just things that pop up. So what surprises most people from your perspective when they try to qualify for a mortgage on their own?
Probably just the expense, the closing costs. A lot of people focus on, hey, I'm going to buy this house per se, and they kind of know the down payment. Okay, I need, whether it's 3%, 5%, 10%, whatever, what have you. But they don't know the closing costs, the title fees, setting up an escrow account. That means you're going to have your real estate taxes and your homeowner's insurance included. And all those things factor into having additional funds, not just for down payment.
Yeah, I know when we've done closing costs, it just always blows people's minds, right? They're sitting there, line item by line item by line item, and they're like, I didn't think I needed to bring that big of a check.
Exactly.
One of the things that I noticed, especially when I was practicing directly with people, was the mindset change that they would have to go through this process. Um, when we talk about our financial reality, you start talking about a little bit. You've gone from sometimes a two income home to a one income home. Maybe you're the primary breadwinner, and you've gone from being the primary breadwinner supporting one household to paying spousal support and child support, now trying to support your own household. But what do you see that you're like, man, I wish you could just get there quicker post divorce on your finances with their mindset?
Really just how much money you need. It drains savings. So a lot of people just don't realize just the impact of a divorce, of just, the separating of the two incomes, separating of the assets, and so really just that financial outlook of what will you look like after this divorce, from a stance of like, how will you be able to handle your children, your family? So there is a major difference in just understanding just the impact of a divorce from a lifestyle change. A lot of times I've seen, especially in divorces, you want to have that same lifestyle just with a different spouse per se, or without that spouse. And there is a reality shift that it has to happen, and it usually starts with your finances.
It does. I had a client one time, and his spouse was his wife wanted to keep the house. He let her buy him out. He took the equity from the home and went and bought a very modest house and paid for it full in cash. Done. Walked away. No mortgage. She ended up going into bankruptcy 3 years later because she couldn't afford their multi-million-dollar house once she cashed him out of his. It was a huge amount of equity. Like he bought a modest house
Sure.
and then still put money in the bank. So how do you? It blew her confidence, right? So she was out there on her
Sure.
own, living in this big, beautiful house, still belonging to the country club because she fought for the country club membership and everything else. How do you rebuild confidence after a
Sure.
major financial reset?
I mean, you really have to have a financial team. We've kind of talked about that, and just within our clients is, you want to have a good circle that can be your board of directors for making financial decisions. People that you can really lean on to say, hey, am I doing the right things? For that example that you just gave, if she had maybe a loan officer, someone that could have, worked with her on the numbers to say, hey, you're better off selling this thing and doing exactly what your ex-husband's doing, it would have been a win for her. But a lot of times, we have to just evaluate our situations. We have to do those self audits. And those self audits may lead into, a refinance, just to get a pool of money to kind of, alleviate some of the pains. And we're going to have to readjust some debts. Budgeting becomes a key factor, obviously, once you have that divorce.
It really does. And I remember that case. That lady got the best advice she could possibly get from everybody at the country club about staying at the country club, keeping the big house. And it was funny when I watched him. He was just like, nope, done with the country. She was like, I want the country club membership. He's like, fine, take it. Uh, and that guy went on. I think he's got like 10 rental houses now, but he was paying spousal support, child support. And, it just, like you said, having that budget. I remember he came out with an Excel spreadsheet one day and he's like, here's my budget. Went back to being a college kid.
Yeah.
He was eating ramen noodles and he was going to get back on his feet. That's what I saw. It was really that buckling down, that after the divorce that helped him rebuild quickly. What other habits have you seen where people rebuild quickly versus those who kind of stay stuck?
It's a mindset shift. So what I've seen people that are successful, and just in general, have a mindset shift. I mean, that's a great example that you're given. That client of yours, really, he knew that, hey, what used to be can't be anymore. And for us to, move forward, we really have to buckle down. So that mindset shift leads into going back to the basics, right? Just the habits, good habits of budgeting, knowing how much your debts are. So it's that self audit. So what does self audit mean? It's really reanalyzing everything that's in your portfolio. Where's your money going out and what's coming in, and making the best decisions in that manner.
Yeah, it was. And he was a fun guy to talk to because he was always just like, you know what? I remember when he went out to a restaurant for the first time in like a year. He's like, I went out to a restaurant. It was so great. Like, I didn't cook for myself. I'm like, oh, awesome. Where'd you go? And he's like, McDonald's. It was so awesome. I actually sat inside and ate there. And he was just on a different level of being able to go from, and he made his take home was seven figures, to be able to go from that mindset of country club all the way down. Um, so, what other dangers have you seen people who make decisions based on what life used to be?
I mean, it's just not reality anymore, right? So, I mean, that's always the illusion. The illusion that everything is the same is always a scary factor when you're dealing with a divorce situation. I mean, anytime change happens, change is going to force you to fluctuate and have to, shift things around. And so, if you maintain the same way, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, that's the definition of insanity. So, you have to be willing to make that changes in your life. It starts with the finances because that's kind of the backbone of everything you do, because your money and how it flows, basically sets up your lifestyle.
It does, and they call it retail therapy for a reason. So, if you can cut that part off, you're so much better. So, I could talk about mindset all day long. I really I like the idea. I love watching people both succeed at it and fail at it. Not that I like watching people fail, but it's interesting to see like, oh, that's weird. Um, But back to the mortgage, right? As attorneys, I'll be honest, I have written separation agreements that I'm fairly confident. We had one time where the other side was like, my client's going to refinance the house, lower earning spouse. I said, okay, they have 15 days. Okay, agreed. And I was like, okay, why? But oh, sure. Uh, there was somebody who clearly didn't know what the process looked like. But where else have you seen mortgage plans start falling apart when people are going through divorce?
Probably just documentation. I mean, I could start by there. Having the necessary documents. Especially when you're going through divorce. We're going to ask for like divorce decrees. We're going to want to see, just the makeup and the structure of the divorce. Who has what responsibilities? Because that becomes a major focus in the mortgage space, right? As far as, hey, if my ex spouse is responsible, but he's not making payments, but it still reflects on my credit report, you're still responsible for that. So we've seen those issues kind of come into play where, even though the decree says one thing, if the other person is not doing their part, it can hinder you.
It can. And very weird situation. I was somewhere and I gave a talk and they heard I was an attorney and the MC came up to me afterwards. It was like, hey, my brother is stuck on this house and the wife is supposed to pay, ex-wife's supposed to pay for it. And she's paying 15 days late every single month just to screw with him. And he's
Wow.
like, and the court won't do anything because it's only 15 days, right? Every time they go to court, they like pay on time, but it's still
Right.
paid in full, but it's always just 15 days late. Um, so I kind of brought up when we as attorneys write agreements, we like finality, right? Court orders like finality. We like to say this is going to be done in X number of days, and if it's not done in X number of days, we get itchy. Right? We're like, hey, let's go back to court. It's not done. What issues have you seen that consistently delay closings or approvals?
I mean, right now, just the interest rates are a major ordeal. And because, if you go back 6 years ago, rates were 2, 3, 4%. Now rates are six and sevens, and so that's a major impact. So it's easy on paper to say, hey, you're going to refinance this house and pay my client off. But then when that payment's going to go up, five, six, seven, $800, and then affordability are concerns, or credit scores. Credit scores have changed from when they first got married or when they first bought the home. And so now it's like, yeah, am going to refinance, but I can't give you a projected time to refinance because I got to get my score up. So, scores will definitely impact what you can or cannot do. And as well as, factoring in the interest rates, because it does that make financial sense, for the other person.
Mhm. Yeah, and nobody thinks about that. Uh, I sold a house that was under one of those phenomenal interest rates, and I remember the person we sold it to, they weren't going to get that interest rate. They were like, "What was your interest rate?" And I was like, 2.8. And they're
Right.
like, "Oh, mine's gonna be like 6.5." And I was like, "That sucks, man." But one of the things that we see a lot is paperwork, right? People are going through
Mhm.
divorce. They're paperwork fatigue. And I remember I had this client one time, and they were not extraordinarily well off. But they were about to really screw everything up because they were tired. They weren't giving the paperwork necessary. And I said, hey, have the mortgage company call me. I have everything. I literally have everything that they need sitting pretty much on my desk. I could do this for you in maybe a couple hours, right? Send everything over they need, put together the package. And the person just said, fine, okay. It is one of the smoothest closings we've ever done. So, that's more about collaboration. Take yourself out of the middle. When else have you seen collaboration really work when attorneys are involved?
Really upfront, early planning, early planning. So we have all have a frame of reference. You have your clients, I have my clients, and so now when we collaborate on a client, we all are trying to give advice or options because we're problem solvers by nature. I mean, that's my job. My job is to problem solve a situation and help the client out. So when we have those opportunities, it's better just to get like-minded folks all in a room to make sure we're all aligned. So we're not leading this consumer who's for the first time, hey, I'm going through this divorce, but you have been over thousands of divorces. I have, multiple divorces right now going on. So it's one of those situations where if we're all in the same room, oh, I see what he was trying to do. Because sometimes you'll say this, you'll say A, I'll say B, but we're going to get to we're going to solve it, but maybe we could solve it together. So I think early planning with that financial team is very important.
Yeah, I always tell people, yeah, it might cost a few dollars more, but if you just put us all in contact for like an hour meeting, we will probably save you 15 hours, 20 hours on down the road. Because, like you said, in an hour, you and I can have a conversation using certain language versus being an intermediary of the client trying to say, oh, my attorney said something like this. And they come back to me and they say, Dante said something like this. And I'm like, wait, come on. It's your perception of what they said. Uh,
Correct.
so, Dante, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. You can't understate how important proper planning is. Proper planning prevents poor performance in every single thing you do. And like you've said, knowing what to expect, having a set reality, the way to do that is to jump in early. Talk to I like what you used, financial team, because when you talk to all these people honestly, and they'll generally try to be honest with you, you'll get a clearer picture of where you need to go next. So thank you for joining us. And if you like this episode, please hit like or subscribe. We look forward to talking to you all next time.
Thank you.